With lawsuits seeming to happen more and more frequently every year, as a physician, your hard-earned assets are constantly at risk. What if there was a way to shield some of your assets from creditors while still being able to benefit from them? In today's video, the fourth of a series, my colleague, licensed estate attorney Kevin Ducombe, and I will discuss an excellent asset protection and estate planning strategy, the Domestic Asset Protection Trust. We'll explain what a domestic asset protection trust is, how to set one up, its pros and cons, and lastly, identify other types of trusts that provide some level of asset protection against creditors. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wealth Matters for Physicians by Altfest Personal Wealth Management, the channel that provides key investing and personal financial planning insights to help physicians achieve their key life goals. Before I bring in Kevin, a few words about Altfest. For nearly 40 years, Altfest Personal Wealth Management has been helping physicians holistically optimize all areas of their personal financial lives in a fully objective, no commissions manner, while as a legal fiduciary, always putting our physicians' best interests first. As physicians, you'll probably also want to know that Altfest is the preferred wealth manager for members of the Medical Society of the State of New York, and the preferred wealth management education provider for both the New York chapter of the American College of Surgeons and the New York State Society of Orthopedic Surgeons, just to name a few of our medical association partners. As I mentioned, my guest today is Kevin Ducombe. Kevin is a licensed estate attorney, an MBA, and a senior financial planning and estate specialist at Altfest. Before joining Altfest, Kevin was a trust officer at Comerica Bank and most recently was a consultant to financial advisors at Commonwealth Financial. A final housekeeping note, this video is for educational purposes only and not intended as specific advice to any specific viewer. Before taking any estate planning actions, please speak with a licensed estate planning attorney in your area, as well as your wealth management advisor and your CPA about your specific situation. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us today on Wealth Matters for Physicians.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get into it. Today we're going to talk about a smart way for our physicians to potentially protect some of their valuable assets against creditors by using domestic asset protection trusts. So Kevin, can you tell us what is a domestic asset protection trust in broad strokes, and what are some of the main steps that one would take to set one up?
Yeah, so domestic asset protection trusts are somewhat of an emerging new trend in that they are trusts that must be created in states that have set up a specific statute allowing for these types of trusts. So often what you need to do is identify a state that allows for it and select a trustee that is located in that state. Often that's going to be a corporate trustee, but in some cases you can use, professional individuals, maybe attorneys, or other people that focus on being trustees and managing trust assets. But effectively, you want to identify the states that allow for it and then identify some assets in your estate that you kind of want to carve out and set up a little bit of a nest egg with. And then the trustee will sort of manage it from there, and you will continue to be a permissible beneficiary of the trust, even though you are actually the one that set up the trust.
So thank you very much, Kevin. That's really great. And that's a nice segue into my next question, which is, can you tell us what are the main benefits of a domestic asset protection trust, as well as what are some of the cons or things to be aware of before you set one up?
Yeah, so it's right there in the name, right? Asset protection is 100% the whole point of these types of trusts. So again, you're going to kind of maybe carve out a nice little nest egg. It's really not designed to protect 100% of your assets. There's probably some questionable issues around whether you're allowed to 100% protect all of your assets from creditors. But yeah, it's designed to sort of a little bit of a carve out for asset protection. So if you properly fund this in the states that allow for it, and the other thing is to really make sure it's done before there's any creditor issues, then you get this strong asset protection. And again, even though you can still have some benefit down the road if necessary, you've protected a nice chunk of your assets from future liability. And again, in the context of those that have high liability professions, like our physicians that we are talking to here today, this type of trust can be invaluable to just give that peace of mind that there's some additional protection out there for at least a part of their estate. Now, the downsides are that not every state allows this. And New York is a great example. They do not have a statute that would allow for one of these trusts. And in fact, they have a statute that says they don't provide any protection for what's called a self-settled irrevocable trust. And that's effectively what a domestic asset protection trust is. So there's a lot of caution needed in states that don't have it. Now, this is America. You're allowed to go to other states and you're allowed to do whatever's legal in that state, including setting up a trust like a domestic asset protection trust. But there's still some concerns. You should definitely walk through this with your attorney if you live in a state that doesn't allow for it. Now, I think there's some practical benefits as well. You know, let's say you are a New York resident, you set one of these up properly in, say, Delaware. 10 years down the road, you know, your resident, let's say, causes an issue. There's a big lawsuit against your practice. They discover you have one of these trusts. Now, they may say, hey, isn't this not allowed in New York? And they talk to their attorney, and their attorney says, well, yeah, technically, but we'd have to go all the way through the courts. We'd have to spend all this money to prove that we can set this type of trust aside. And right there, they may say, well, that sounds really expensive. You know, maybe we're going to get into settlement talks a little bit earlier. So you're just creating a little bit of a roadblock, even if arguably in certain states, if you go through the whole court system, you know, you might be able to catch some of the assets in this trust. It's just going to create some additional preventative arrangement that will probably lead to quicker settlement talks.
So that's really great. Again, I'm going to kind of ask a question on the fly here, which is that, you know, you really explained well how the domestic asset protection trust, you know, shields your assets from creditors. That's really great. But I think you had also mentioned that it is, you're able to get some of that, you're able to have access to that as the grantor. You're able to access some of the assets as the grantor. How would that work? Like, let's say you created one, the assets have not been attacked, everything's fine, everything's quiet, and then later on in life you decide you actually need some of that money. How would that work?
Yeah, so it's kind of like other irrevocable trusts people may be familiar setting up for their beneficiaries. There's oftentimes some sort of defined standard, or just the trustee is given discretion to entertain requests from the beneficiary for distributions to be made. So as I indicated, you're going to have typically an independent trustee, in this context, somebody in that particular state that allows for these trusts. So that trustee is going to receive your request and then decide whether or not to make the distribution. Now, again, you've sort of created this relationship, so the expectation is sort of they're not going to often reject your request, although they would have the legal authority to do so. But yeah, you would effectively make a request to the trustee for a distribution for some defined purpose. They would evaluate that and then, in most cases, I think, make that distribution to you.
That's great. That's great. And also, I know we've been focusing on in this video about you know, creditor protection and how the domestic asset protection trust is really good in this. But for our audience, general knowledge, you know, do other types of trusts also have a creditor protection?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, any trust that's irrevocable is going to have some element of creditor protection, at least at certain points. So for instance, the ILITs, you know, if you've transferred funds in, there were no issues when you were creating the trust and transferring money over, you've moved those assets out of your estate. So if you end up having a creditor issue down the road, they can't go back to your ILIT and try to take your insurance policy away or any of the money you put in to pay premiums on your insurance policy. So yeah, there's a whole host of irrevocable trusts that are going to create some level of creditor protection. Although there can be questions at certain stages, you know, at some point maybe you're transferring money in, but there's a known potential lawsuit in the background, you know, then there can be some issues. But generally speaking, assets in irrevocable trusts are going to be protected from creditors. Now, that's very different from a revocable trust, which is very commonly used for general estate planning purposes, often to ensure you're avoiding probate. But because it's revocable, because you can change it at any time, pull the assets out, add assets, all of that sort of stuff, there'd be no creditor protection for those types of trusts.
Great, great. And last question for this video is a good question that was asked by a physician. And that is, let's say a physician sets up and funds an irrevocable trust. It could be an irrevocable life insurance trust or an intentionally defective grantor trust, domestic asset protection trust. For some reason, they have some main reason, like creditor protection they'd like, reducing estate taxes, gifting future value out of the estate, and so on. But then Congress, later changes the estate tax laws. Is all that time, effort, and money wasted? What would happen then?
Yeah, this was a really hot topic in 2021. Coming out of the 2020 elections, there was the sense that one party was in control of the White House and Congress, and they were going to pass all of these new bills, and everything was going to change. So one of the things we kept hearing was what was called retroactivity. So it was this idea that, we were already in March or April, but they wanted to make things retroactive to 1/1, so that even if you saw the bill and you thought it was going to pass and you tried to do something, they would still tax you on whatever you had tried to change in the meantime, that sort of thing. So part of the answer is it's possible in that we saw it proposed. However, what we also learned is none of those things ended up passing. So we can't really say for sure it was that reason they didn't pass, but it could have been a factor in a lot of the debates. Maybe that was too much for some of the more moderate lawmakers that were looking to make compromises and things like that. So I think it's something to always consider, but I think what we really learned from 2021 is that if we want to make significant changes, there's got to just sort of be a line in the sand. They'll grandfather trusts that have already been created, that have already been funded, and they can really only change the rules moving forward.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for being with us today on Wealth Matters for Physicians. I think you've given a lot of great answers to our questions and really helped physicians understand some of the complexities with creditor protection and the domestic asset protection trust. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
If you'd like to discuss the information explained in today's video, receive a complimentary analysis of your investment portfolio or a retirement readiness analysis, or discuss any of your other personal financial planning areas with an Altfest professional at no obligation, please contact my colleague Jesse Freeling at 212-796-8732 or by emailing Jesse at his email address, which is also in the description of today's video below. If you liked today's video, please click the subscribe button below and hit the bell icon to receive notifications each time we release a new one. If you think that a fellow physician would find this video interesting or useful, please share it with him or her to help them also get their finances optimized. Lastly, as always, if you have topics you'd like us to cover, like or dislike certain things that we're doing, or have any other feedback, we'd love to hear from you. So please share your comments in the comments section below. Well, that's all for now, physicians. Thank you very much for watching today's video, and I look forward to being with you again in our next one. Until then, be well, and remember to keep on optimizing your finances, or let us help you if you'd like.